Meal planning does not have to be a mission. So in this video, we're going to look at 14 layout ideas that you can use to help make your meal planning easier. For this first one, it's good to note that you don't actually have to have your meal plan as a completely separate layout in your journal. Instead, you can just include it on your regular weekly or daily layout. In this one, I've just taken up a small space in the top corner to list out what the meals are going to be for dinners in particular. If you want to list out more meals though, you can make this space a little larger or work your way across the page to list out 3 separate meals. But often when it comes to meal planning, a lot of people don't actually plan every single meal. They may have certain ones that they use in rotation for breakfast or lunch and really only plan their dinners. But if you need a layout that's a little bit more complete, then something like a full weekly meal plan could be for you. In this one, we have each of the days of the week listed down the side with a space to write in breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack for each day. I just use initials to indicate each of those meals because it's a little bit faster to set up. And it could be useful to combine this list with a grocery list so you know what you need to buy when you go to do your shopping. By having the two right next to each other, it means that you can scan your eyes down the food you're planning for the week and ensure that you've got all of those ingredients that you'll need written on your grocery list, and take this when you go and do that shopping. If you didn't so much feel like taking your journal out when you go to do your groceries though, you could instead put a sticky note or a separate piece of paper on here and use that to write the items down. Flipping over though, and our next idea is an every meal planner, where again each day of the week is taken up a horizontal space across the page. This one's broken down into 2 columns, so main meals in the first column and then snacks in the second. Again, just using initials to indicate each of those meals. You could set one of these up at the start of every week, or set up a series of them in your journal for each month, so week 1, week 2, so on and so forth. In terms of how you'd actually structure this layout, it very much depends on how many meals you eat in a day, or how many meals you're planning for. Remember that all of the ideas we have in this video are just ideas, so tweak them to fit how you're going to be doing your meal planning, either by making the spacing slightly different, including more or less columns depending on how many things you're planning for. And one iteration of a similar style layout is the one we have on the right here. You can see that the general structure is kind of similar to the one on the left, except we're using more columns, and instead of having main meals, snacks, we work across in each of the rows. So mains, snacks, mains, snacks. Each of the pink lines indicates the header for each section, and then the white space underneath this is where you'd write in your meals. On some of these layouts I've filled them in loosely so you can kind of see how you'd use it. But flipping over, our next one is a monthly meal plan. Now technically speaking, you do not have to use this to plan out all of your monthly meals in advance. You can just use, the first week, then the second, then the third as you plan them. But this is a really nice snapshot summary of everything that you're eating over the month. While this one is set up to be a monthly meal plan, so you go in and write down what you're intending to eat, you could also use a similar style layout for a meal log. Technically speaking, the majority of the layouts we have in this video could be meal logs instead, if it's more important to you to keep track of what you did eat rather than what you planned to eat. This one is set up though so that we have 2 columns on each of the pages, so breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. And then depending on what you ate or were planning to eat on each of those days, you just write across from whichever day number you're working on. If it's also important to you to keep track of whether you did eat the things that you planned, you could also include a little checkbox next to each of the entries, just so that you can check them off to say, yes, I did eat this as planned, or maybe cross it out to say, no, I ate something else. If you like the idea of monthly, but this vertical style isn't really for you, then you can of course use something like a calendar layout. This one again is a monthly meal planner. You have a space for each of the days of the month to write in what you were planning on eating. I've just separated each of the boxes out into 3 segments, so just focusing on those main meals, but you could take up a little less space for those and also have spaces for snacks on here too. It kind of depends on how big your handwriting is, how big the kind of titles of the meals you're planning are, but in terms of the extra space that you have around the calendar, you can of course fill this with decoration like I've done, or you could have something like a checklist of things you need to do to prepare things for your meals, have a space for meal ideas. If you like to do any kind of like weekly meal prep rituals, you could write down the steps along the side here, or this could be a space to write down your grocery list, again just possibly using a sticky note or some kind of removable list so that you can write yourself a new one with each week. Of course, the structure of this one will change depending on which calendar month you're looking at. Notably, this calendar month started on a Thursday, so we have that open space at the top here, but for some months it's going to be a little different, just depending on which day of the week the month actually starts on, whereas something like this layout is going to have the same structure every single month, just slightly less rows depending on how many days there are in the month. Flipping forward though, our next idea is a reusable meal planner. So you'll probably be able to see that this page is a little bit shiny, and that's because this entire page has been covered with contact paper. You can pick this up at stationery stores. I've got a link in the description box to, well, not only the contact paper, but everything that I've used in this setup. But the cool part about the contact paper is that it effectively turns this layout into a whiteboard. That means that you can use a permanent marker or a whiteboard marker, like a dry erase marker. I'm just using a permanent marker. You can go in and write down your meal plan. So we could say maybe lemon chicken was the thing we were eating on Monday. Possibly we were having some kind of wraps on Tuesday, maybe stir fry on Wednesday, so on and so forth. But you write out your meal plan at the start of the week, and then when it comes to the end of the week, when you want to make your next meal plan, you can just rub that out with a tissue. The thing to note here is that in setting up this kind of layout, anything that you don't want to erase each week should be put underneath the contact paper. So for me, that's the grid layout, that's the headers, the title, also the decoration. And while the permanent marker I've used here does rub off with a little bit of effort, it can be preferable to use a dry erase marker because then it comes off a little bit easier and it has less likelihood to stain your page. The nice part about a layout like this though is that it is reusable. You only have to set it up once in your journal and then use it week after week. Another way that you can do a reusable meal plan though is using sticky notes. On each of the sticky notes, you'd write down the typical meals that you have for different set times of the day, and then depending on what you're planning on eating for any day of the week, you can just peel the sticky note off and stick it onto the relevant day. Obviously, you want to make sure that your sticky notes are sized appropriately so that they actually fit into whichever space you're putting them. So I'd probably opt for sticky notes that are a little bit smaller than these ones, but it can be a nice way to do a reusable layout and change out your meals while also giving you a stock of meal ideas, because they can be very useful when it comes to meal planning. Thinking more about meal ideas for meal planning, our next idea is a meal planning cheat sheet. Now this one is just a simple kind of list version where you group it into different categories depending on what you want to group it by. The ones we have here are related to the main protein style, so what kind of meat is involved, or is it vegetarian? But it can also be really useful to have groupings of your favorite meals and quick meals, especially for those weeknights or possibly even weekends where you really just aren't feeling it. You're really trying not to revert to takeout, so what kind of meals can you whip up quickly and easily so that you're still having something home cooked? This can be a very handy resource because then when you come to do your meal planning at the start of the week, you've got all of those ideas that you know that your family or household enjoys, and you can pick from those in particular. I swear that thinking of meal ideas is one of the hardest parts of meal planning. Another style of meal planning cheat sheet though has all of your items in a list, but then you have columns along the side to indicate different groupings. This is especially good for foods that go across multiple meals, so ones that could be good for lunch and dinner, or breakfast and lunch. And you can also use it to denote different things as well. So which ones are fast, which ones are your favorites, which ones are vegetarian versus which ones have meat. It can also be good to indicate different allergy information along here, just so then if you need to cook food that can be allowed within a certain type of diet or is free of any particular allergens, you can scan your eye down that list and pick out the meals that would be appropriate. On to the next idea though. This one is another that can help you figure out what to eat in a week, but in particular it is an ingredient-based meal planning cheat sheet. In this one we again list out all of the meals in question, but the columns along here indicate what common ingredients they have. This is especially good for any ingredients you have that are perishable, but they don't necessarily fully get used up in just one meal. For instance, I know one of the ones that we have is cabbage, in particular using it to make things like coleslaw, but an entire bag of cabbage is gonna last us 3 separate meals. So oftentimes if we buy the bag, we're gonna have hot dogs one night, baked potatoes the next night, and katsu bowl the third night. You can do this for a range of different ingredients though, especially the ones that you might want to buy in bulk to save some money, and just thinking about which meals or which food types can you use those ingredients for and put that into your meal planning process. Along the side here you can also indicate what kind of categories they fall under. So for instance, ones that are your favorite could could have a little heart next to them, ones that are fast could have a little lightning bolt, but this style of layout is one that I personally find quite useful. I don't necessarily put it in my journal. Technically speaking, you don't have to put any of these in your journal. I have mine set up in Excel. Our next idea though is a this then that list, and you can use this style of layout for any kind of meal prepping where you prepare an ingredient rather than a full meal, and that ingredient can then be used in multiple things depending on what you feel like. For instance, if you make a batch of grilled veggies, we could then use them in a veggie toss, we could make grilled veggie burgers, pasta with veg, some kind of like a pasta salad. The actual categories you use here very much depend on the kind of things that you can kind of cook in bulk and then use in multiple recipes, but having lists like this means that when you come to do your meal planning, you can say, okay, I'm gonna prepare a bulk container of mashed potatoes, then what can I use those leftover mashed potatoes in throughout the week? You don't have to do all 5 of the ideas. You might only want to make enough for maybe 2 of the meals, but it can just help speed you up throughout that meal making process during your week. After this one though, our next idea is a daily meal theme list, and this is effectively breaking up your week into a bunch of different daily themes and then listing out the ideas that you have for meals in those categories. For instance, maybe Monday is always a pasta night, maybe Tuesday is for tacos and wraps, Wednesday could be for shared meals because it's typically when company comes over. All of the categories completely up to you and what your household likes to do. But when it comes to meal planning, sitting there umming and ahhing about which meals you could cook, it's a little bit easier if you have themed days because then the list to pick from is a lot shorter. It also helps you get a little variety in your week, so you're not having exactly the same types of meals every single day. While these layouts were specifically related to meal planning, we also have a separate video which has other food related ideas which is worth checking out. In that one we have things related to kitchen care, meal logging, seasonality of produce, and a bunch of other layout ideas. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.